Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating neuroscience of what happens in your brain when anger strikes. We're going to decode the actual biological machinery behind one of our most intense emotions, turning some pretty complex brain science into clear, actionable insights.
So picture this. You're completely calm, having a pretty decent morning, right? Then someone makes just one tiny, minor slight at work. Or, you're driving and somebody completely cuts you off in traffic. Bam! Within literally seconds, your heart is just pounding against your ribs, your jaw is clenched tight, and you're saying, or maybe shouting, things you might immediately regret.
It's a terrifyingly fast transition, isn't it? Which brings us to the big question. What on earth just happened inside your brain in those few seconds? And honestly, who or what was actually in control? Because it really feels like something else just grabbed the steering wheel. And, as we're going to see, biologically speaking, that is exactly what went down.
All right, let's break this down. Section 1, Anatomy of an Anger Trigger.
What's absolutely wild here is the sheer speed of your brain's threat detector. At literally 0 milliseconds, your amygdala, that primal threat center, processes the emotional trigger before your conscious mind even registers it exists. Just milliseconds later, it signals your hypothalamus to release hormones. And it takes a full 6 seconds, 6 whole seconds, for your prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of you, to finally re-engage. You are quite literally reacting way before you are thinking.
Which leads us to Section 2, the amygdala hijack explained.
So this brings us to a really brilliant concept from psychologist Daniel Goleman called the amygdala hijack. This happens when that amygdala fires off a high-threat signal that totally bypasses your prefrontal cortex. Your rational thought is basically locked out of the room, and boom, a direct, unfiltered emotional reaction takes over. It perfectly explains that intense flash of road rage, or why a tiny workplace issue suddenly escalates into a screaming match. Your brain perceived a threat and just hijacked your behavior to protect you.
And just look at the stress hormone cascade that takes over your body. Step 1. The amygdala sounds the alarm to the hypothalamus. Step 2, the hypothalamus just floods your system with adrenaline and cortisol. Step 3, your heart rate spikes, blood pressure shoots up, and your muscles tense up. So, that sudden pounding heart and clenched jaw? Yeah, that is not just a feeling. That is a massive chemical dump into your bloodstream prepping you to either fight or run for your life.
But here's where your brain kind of plays a trick on you. Because of this massive physical arousal, you get stuck in a self-reinforcing loop. Your brain registers the pounding heart and the tense muscles, and it interprets them as absolute confirmation that this threat is totally real and completely justified. This is exactly why being angry feels so incredibly right in the moment. Your body is basically shouting at your brain, "Hey, look how mobilized we are. We must be right to be this furious."
Moving on to Section 3, the hidden dangers of venting.
We always hear that we need to vent to our friends, to just get the anger out of our system. Well, the neuroscience shows this can actually be a massive trap. When we vent, we tend to ruminate, replaying the event over and over again. And that actually keeps your stress response artificially active. Your amygdala just keeps firing. True resolution, on the other hand, means letting that physiological arousal actually cool down. Venting? It can honestly be like throwing gasoline on a fire you're trying to put out.
And the stakes for actually cooling down are pretty high. If you stay in a state of chronic anger, you're sustaining elevated levels of cortisol. And over time, this biological wear and tear is severe. We're talking about a significantly increased risk of cardiovascular disease, immune system suppression, and a whole host of mental health problems. Your body simply was not designed to leave the emergency alarm blaring 24/7.
It's also super important to look at how our environment shapes all of this. Research shows that how we express anger is deeply socially conditioned. Studies neutrally observe that society generally permits men to express anger, while women are often penalized for those exact same expressions. The science shows both genders internalize these norms in pretty damaging ways, which really complicates how we process what is just a universal biological signal.
All right, Section 4, how to regulate your anger.
First up, we need to establish a major psychological relief, which is separating the emotion from the action. Anger is just an emotion. It's a universal, totally natural biological signal that something is wrong. Aggression, however, that's a behavior. It is a conscious choice. The neuroscience shows there is always a window between the stimulus and your response. So you never have to feel guilty for that biological flash of anger, but you absolutely are responsible for whether or not you choose aggression.
So when that flash happens, you essentially have two main coping strategies. One is suppression,
just shoving the anger down. But brain scans show that if you just suppress it, you remain physiologically flooded. You might look totally chill on the outside, but inside, your heart is racing and cortisol is just pumping. A much better strategy is cognitive reappraisal. This means actively reinterpreting the meaning of the trigger. Changing how you think about what just happened actually measurably reduces the activity in your amygdala.
But to even have the brain power to reappraise, your prefrontal cortex needs energy. Enter the HALT framework. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. These 4 states drastically lower your anger threshold. In fact, studies show that simple hunger measurably increases aggressive judgments. It proves that being hangry is a very real, purely biological phenomenon. If your rational brain is starved of energy, your amygdala just runs the whole show.
Which brings us to a super practical tool and a really important number, 6, the 6-second rule. Remember that timeline we talked about earlier? The initial neurochemical surge of anger, that massive adrenaline dump, only lasts about 6 seconds. If you can just pause, take a breath, and simply wait out those 6 seconds without reacting, you give your prefrontal cortex the time it needs to come back online. You are quite literally buying time for your rational brain.
Another highly effective evidence-based approach is ACT, or Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. ACT trains you to view anger just as a signal to observe, rather than an immediate command that you have to react to. It's all about building psychological distance from your triggers. You notice the pounding heart, you notice the clenched jaw, and you say to yourself, okay, I'm experiencing anger right now. You watch it, rather than instantly becoming it.
And let's be absolutely clear about our objective here. The goal of understanding all this brain science is regulation, not elimination. Healthy anger is actually a vital protective signal. It tells us when our boundaries have been crossed or when we're witnessing an injustice. You don't want to lose your anger. You just want to channel it into productive expression rather than destructive aggression.
And this brings us to a final, really powerful way to reframe your experience. Your emotions are not you, they are signals to understand. The next time you feel that sudden flash and your heart starts pounding, ask yourself, are you going to let your primal biology hijack the wheel, or will you take your 6 seconds and choose who you want to be?